Gerald Tucker, a 68-year-old retired human diplomat, never expected to find himself in the position of potential adoptive father to 4 alien beauties. Yet here he was, standing before a quartet of young female Vulcans in the Earth Embassy, their pleading eyes fixed upon him as they begged for his protection and guardianship. The year was 2157, and humanity's uneasy relationship with the Vulcan species had been marked by decades of Cold War and mutual distrust. Gerald's diplomatic career had been spent navigating the treacherous waters of human-Vulcan relations, and he thought those days were behind him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The summons to the Vulcan embassy had come suddenly, interrupting Gerald's quiet retirement. As he made his way through the sleek, angular corridors of the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to occur. The embassy staff, usually stoic and impassive, seemed on edge, their eyes darting nervously as they escorted him to a private chamber. There he was confronted by the sight of 4 young Vulcan women, their pointed ears and arched eyebrows unmistakable. The leader of the group, who introduced herself as Spisa, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but Gerald detected a hint of desperation in her eyes as she explained their plight. "Our homeworld has been devastated by a catastrophic solar flare," Spisa said, her words precise and measured. "We are refugees, Mr. Tucker, and you are our only hope for survival and integration into Earth society." Gerald's mind reeled at the implications. The Vulcan homeworld, destroyed? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence stood before him in the form of these 4 refugees. As he processed this information, the Vulcan ambassador entered the room, his face a mask of gravity. "Mr. Tucker," the ambassador began, "what you see before you is part of a controversial new initiative to foster better relations between our species. These young women possess valuable scientific knowledge that could greatly benefit humanity's interstellar expansion efforts. We propose that you adopt them as your wards." The weight of the decision pressed down on Gerald. He knew that accepting could make him a pariah among his fellow humans, potentially compromising Earth's security. The long-standing tension between humans and Vulcans had created deep-seated mistrust on both sides. Could he really bridge that gap? As Gerald contemplated his choice, alarms suddenly blared throughout the embassy. The harsh sound cut through the tense atmosphere, and the ambassador's eyes widened in alarm. "We're under attack," he said, his usual composure cracking. "Anti-alien extremists have learned of the adoption scheme. They've breached our outer defenses." In that moment, Gerald's diplomatic instincts kicked in. He ushered the 4 Vulcan women towards a nearby secure room, his mind racing. The extremists were closing in, and he had to make a choice. Would he protect these vulnerable aliens, risking his own safety and human loyalties? Or would he prioritize his own security? As they barricaded themselves in the secure room, Gerald looked at the 4 alien beauties who had placed their trust in him. Their faces were composed, but he could see the fear in their eyes. He realized that his decision would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for the future of human-Vulcan relations. Time was running out. The sounds of combat echoed through the embassy as security forces engaged the extremists. Gerald Tucker, once a key player in interstellar diplomacy, now found himself at the center of a crisis that could reshape the galaxy. The fate of 4 alien refugees, and possibly the future of 2 species, rested in his aging hands. Gerald's heart raced as he surveyed the secure room, the sounds of combat growing ever closer. The 4 Vulcan women stood silently, their faces impassive but their eyes betraying a hint of fear. In that moment, Gerald made his decision. "This way," he whispered urgently, moving towards a nondescript panel on the far wall. With practiced ease, he pressed a series of hidden buttons, revealing a narrow opening. "It's an emergency escape tunnel. Quickly, now." Spica nodded, ushering her companions into the dark passage. Gerald entered last, sealing the entrance behind them just as the door to the secure room burst open. The tunnel was cramped and pitch black, forcing them to move single file. "Stay close," Gerald instructed, his voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps echoing in the confined space. "I know these tunnels from my diplomatic days. They'll lead us to safety." As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Gerald's mind raced. He had just committed to protecting 4 alien refugees. potentially jeopardizing his standing among his own people. Yet as he heard the soft breathing of the Vulcan women behind him, he knew he couldn't have chosen differently. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, Gerald halted the group. "We're approaching an exit," he whispered. "It leads to a transit station. We'll need to blend in." Pushing open a concealed door, they emerged into a bustling underground hub. The noise and activity were a stark contrast to the quiet of the tunnel, and Gerald noticed the Vulcans stiffen slightly at the sensory overload. "Stay calm," he murmured. "Follow my lead." Gerald led them through the crowd, his eyes darting around for any sign of pursuit. He spotted a clothing store and made a beeline for it, using his diplomatic credentials to acquire a set of human clothes and accessories for each of the Vulcans. "Put these on," he instructed, handing out the garments. "They'll help hide your distinctive features." The Vulcans complied without question, donning the Earth fashions with methodical precision. Spica pulled a beanie over her pointed ears, while the others used scarves and high collars to conceal theirs. With their eyebrows covered by bangs or makeup, they could pass for eccentric humans at a glance. As they exited the store, Gerald pulled out his communicator, hesitating for a moment before making the call. "Marcus, it's Gerald. I need your help." 20 minutes later, they arrived at a modest apartment complex. Marcus Holloway, a man in his early 70s with a shock of white hair, opened the door, his eyes widening at the sight of the group. "Gerald, what in the world?" he began, but Gerald cut him off. "I'll explain inside. Please, Marcus, it's important." Once inside, Gerald recounted the events at the embassy, while the Vulcans stood silently, taking in their new surroundings with careful observation. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "Aliens, Gerald? You're harboring alien refugees? Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" "I do," Gerald replied firmly. "But these women possess valuable scientific knowledge. Their presence here could revolutionize our understanding of the universe." Before Marcus could respond, a news alert flashed on the screen. A stern-faced anchor appeared, her voice tight with tension. "Breaking news. An attack on the Vulcan embassy has left several injured. Reports indicate that a group of Vulcan refugees may be missing. Authorities urge citizens to remain vigilant and report any suspicious alien activity." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Gerald exchanged a worried glance with Spica, whose composure seemed to waver for the first time. "We can't stay here long," Gerald said, turning to Marcus, "but I need to make one more call." With a deep breath, he entered a familiar code into his communicator. After a few tense moments, a gruff voice answered. "Tucker here." "Jack, it's your father. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end. "Dad, what's going on?" "I can't explain over the comm. Can you meet us? It's urgent." Another pause, longer this time. "All right, there's a secure location in the old industrial district. I'll send you the coordinates. But Dad, this better be good." As Gerald ended the call, he noticed Spica watching him intently. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of emotion in her dark eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or concern. "We should depart soon," she said, her voice calm despite the circumstances. "The longer we remain, the greater the risk of discovery." Gerald nodded, turning to Marcus. "Thank you, old friend. I know I've put you in a difficult position." Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "Just be careful, Gerald. The world out there, it's not as accepting as we'd like to believe." As they prepared to leave, Gerald couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He looked at the 4 Vulcan women, Spica and her companions, and realized that their fate, and possibly the future of human-Vulcan relations, now rested in his hands. With a nod to Marcus, Gerald led the group out into the gathering darkness of the city, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Gerald led the group through the city's shadowy streets, his communicator buzzed with an incoming message. Coordinates flashed on the screen, accompanied by a terse note from his son. "Secure location, 1 hour." "This way?" Gerald murmured, guiding the Vulcans through a series of winding alleys. The sound of sirens in the distance kept them alert, their pace quickening with each wail. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the old industrial district. A figure emerged from the shadows, his stance rigid and eyes wary. "Dad?" Captain Jack Tucker said, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. His gaze swept over the four Vulcan women, lingering on their barely concealed alien features. "I think you better explain what's going on." Gerald took a deep breath, recounting the events at the embassy and their subsequent escape. As he spoke, he noticed Jack's expression hardening, his jaw clenching tighter with each word. "Damn it, Dad," Jack hissed when Gerald finished. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Harboring alien refugees? This could be seen as treason." "I couldn't leave them to die, Jack," Gerald replied firmly. "They have valuable knowledge that could benefit humanity. We can't let fear and prejudice cloud our judgment." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. All right. What's done is done. We need to focus on keeping you all safe and figuring out this mess." As they discussed their options, Spica stepped forward. "If I may," she interjected, her voice calm but tinged with urgency, "our presence here puts you all at risk. Perhaps it would be prudent to seek a more isolated location." Jack nodded slowly. "I might have a solution. There's an off-grid safe house in the Rocky Mountains, owned by the Earth Defense Force. It's remote, secure, and off the books." Gerald raised an eyebrow. "Sounds perfect. But how do we get there without being detected?" "It won't be easy," Jack admitted. "We'll need to use multiple modes of transportation, change routes frequently. It'll be a long journey, but it's our best shot at keeping you all safe." As they finalized their plans, Gerald noticed Spica watching him intently. Her dark eyes seemed to hold a mixture of curiosity and something else. Concern, perhaps. He found himself drawn to her gaze, a connection forming that both intrigued and unsettled him. The journey to the safe house was arduous. They traveled by ground car, maglev train, and even on foot through dense forests. Each leg of the trip brought new challenges and close calls. During a particularly tense moment, as they hid from a patrol drone in a cramped cave, Gerald felt Spica's hand on his arm. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through him. He turned to find her watching him, her usual mask of logic slipping to reveal a flicker of worry. "Are you all right, Mr. Tucker?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gerald nodded, surprised by the depth of emotion he saw in her eyes. "I'm fine, Spica, and please, call me Gerald." As they continued their journey, Gerald noticed similar changes in the other Vulcan women. Talar, usually the most reserved of the group, began asking him questions about human customs with genuine curiosity. Valar, the youngest, sought his reassurance during moments of stress, and T'Pol, the scientist of the group, engaged him in lengthy discussions about the differences between human and Vulcan physiology. After days of travel, they finally arrived at the safe house. Nestled high in the Rocky Mountains, the structure was a marvel of camouflage technology, nearly invisible against the rugged landscape. Inside, Jack immediately set up a secure communication network. "I need to start investigating the embassy attack," he explained, fingers flying over holographic interfaces. "Something doesn't add up about this whole situation." As Jack delved into his investigation, Gerald found himself taking on a paternal role with the Vulcan women. He spent hours teaching them about human culture, explaining idioms, and sharing stories from his diplomatic career. In return, the Vulcans shared their advanced scientific knowledge. T'Pol's explanations of Vulcan astrophysics left Gerald in awe, while Vilar's insights into xenobiology sparked ideas for potential medical breakthroughs. But it was Spica who captured most of Gerald's attention. Her logical facade continued to crack, revealing glimpses of a deep well of emotion beneath. He found himself drawn to her intelligence, her subtle humor, and the way her eyes lit up when she made a new discovery about human behavior. As days turned into weeks, Gerald's feelings for Spica grew more complex. He was acutely aware of the vast differences between them, age, species, culture, yet he couldn't deny the connection forming between them. One evening, as they stood on the safe house's observation deck, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant hues, Spica turned to Gerald. "I find myself experiencing emotions I cannot fully suppress," she admitted, her voice tinged with confusion and something akin to wonder. is this a common effect of prolonged exposure to humans? Gerald chuckled softly. It might be, or it might just be the effect of extraordinary circumstances bringing people together. Spica's eyebrow arched in a gesture Gerald had come to find endearing. Fascinating. I shall have to meditate on this further. Their moment was interrupted by Jack bursting onto the deck, his face grim. Dad, we've got a problem. A big one. He explained his findings. The extremist group Earth First had infiltrated various levels of government and military organizations. Their reach was far greater than anyone had suspected. That's not all, Jack continued, his voice tense. They're planning to sabotage the upcoming Earth-Vulcan diplomatic summit. If they succeed, it could trigger an interstellar war. The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Gerald looked at Spica, seeing his own persistence reflected in her eyes. They had come too far, risked too much to let Earth First succeed. What's our next move? Gerald asked, his diplomatic instincts kicking into high gear. Jack's lips curved into a grim smile. We're going to crash that summit and expose their plot. It's time to put your diplomatic skills to the test, Dad. As they began formulating their plan, Gerald felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The fate of two worlds now rested on their shoulders, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But as he looked at the four Vulcan women who had come to mean so much to him, particularly Spica, he knew he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The plan was set. They would infiltrate the summit and expose Earth First's plot, despite the toll. As their transport ship docked with the massive space station orbiting Earth, Gerald felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. He glanced at Spica, her features concealed beneath a maintenance crew uniform. She met his gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Remember, Jack whispered as they disembarked, we're just routine maintenance workers. Act natural. The group split into two teams. Gerald and Spica headed towards the main conference hall, while Jack led Talar, Vilar, and T'Pol to the security control room. As they parted ways, Gerald squeezed Spica's shoulder reassuringly. The station's corridors bustled with activity. Delegates from various worlds hurried past, their voices a cacophony of different languages. Gerald and Spica kept their heads down, pushing carts of cleaning supplies as they navigated the labyrinthine structure. Suddenly, a security checkpoint loomed ahead. Gerald's heart raced as he saw the guards scanning ID badges. They didn't have the proper credentials to pass. This way, he murmured, guiding Spica down a side corridor. The passage narrowed, forcing them to abandon their carts. As they rounded a corner, voices echoed from up ahead. Gerald frantically searched for an escape route, his eyes landing on a small door labeled Storage. Without hesitation, he pulled Spica inside, closing the door behind them. The closet was cramped, barely large enough for the two of them. Gerald found himself pressed against Spica, acutely aware of her proximity. In the dim light, he could see her eyes widen slightly, her usual composure faltering. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Gerald swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. "We should wait here until the coast is clear," he whispered. Spica nodded, her breath warm against his cheek. Logical. Meanwhile, Jack and the Vulcan women had reached the security control room. Using a combination of T'Pol's technical expertise and Jack's military override codes, they gained access to the station's systems. "Look at this," Vilar said, pointing to a screen displaying personnel assignments. "These security officers were all transferred here within the last week." Jack leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Earth First operatives. They've positioned their people throughout the station." As they dug deeper, a familiar name caught Talar's attention. "Ambassador Marcus Stern," she read aloud. "His access codes have been used in restricted areas multiple times in the past 24 hours. Jack's eyes sharp. "He's coordinating the operation. We need to alert my father." Back in the storage closet, Gerald and Spica emerged cautiously. The corridor was clear, allowing them to continue their journey to the conference hall. As they approached, the sounds of the summit grew louder, a mix of formal speeches and diplomatic small talk. Gerald spotted Ambassador Stern near the entrance, engaged in conversation with a group of delegates. He turned to Spica, keeping his voice low. I'll approach Stern, try to get him talking. You scan for the cloaking device. Spica nodded, her hand brushing against his arm. Be careful, Gerald. He made his way toward Stern, adopting the confident stride of a seasoned diplomat. Ambassador Stern, he called out, plastering on a smile. It's been too long. Stern turned, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with a polite smile. Mr. Tucker, I wasn't aware you were attending the summit. As Gerald engaged Stern in conversation, steering him away from the other delegates, Spica moved through the crowd. She discreetly activated a small scanner hidden in her sleeve, searching for the unique energy signature of Vulcan technology. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Panicked shouts erupted as delegates scrambled for safety. Gerald's eyes met Spica's across the room, a shared look of alarm passing between them. Explosions rocked the station, sending tremors through the floor. Without thinking, Gerald rushed to Spica, shielding her body with his own as debris rained down around them. In the chaos, Ambassador Stern slipped away, a triumphant smirk on his face. Gerald caught a glimpse of him activating a small device before he vanished from sight. Jack and the Vulcan women fought their way through the panicked crowds, desperately trying to reach the conference hall. As they arrived, they saw Gerald helping Spica to her feet amidst the destruction. Dad, Jack called out. Stern's the ringleader. He's got the cloaking device. Gerald's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of the invisible ambassador. We need to track him down before he can cause any more damage. Talar stepped forward, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. We can modify the station's sensors to detect the cloaking field. It will take time, but it's possible. Jack nodded. Do it. I'll coordinate with any security forces we can trust. Dad, you and Spica try to evacuate as many delegates as you can. As the group split up once more, another explosion tore through the station. The floor beneath Gerald and Spica gave way, sending them tumbling into a lower level. They landed hard, surrounded by twisted metal and sparking wires. Gerald groaned, pushing himself up. Spica, are you all right? She sat up slowly, a green bruise forming on her forehead. I am functional, but I believe we are trapped. Looking around, Gerald realized she was right. The explosion had sealed off both ends of the corridor. Worse, a hissing sound indicated a breach in the hull. The air was growing thin. As the gravity of their situation sank in, Spica turned to Gerald, her dark eyes filled with an emotion he had never seen in them before. Gerald, she said softly, I find that in this moment of danger, I can no longer suppress my feelings for you. Gerald's heart raced, and not just from the lack of oxygen. He reached out, taking Spica's hand in his own. Spica, His words were cut off by a sudden invisible force slamming him against the wall. Ambassador Stern's voice echoed through the corridor, filled with malice. How touching, he sneered. The human and the Vulcan, finding love in their final moments. Gerald struggled to his feet, his eyes darting around for any sign of their attacker. Spica closed her eyes, focusing her Vulcan senses. Gerald, she whispered, 3 meters to your left. He lunged, his fist connecting with something solid. Stern grunted in pain, the impact causing his cloaking field to flicker. As Gerald grappled with the invisible ambassador, Spica searched for a way to disable the cloaking device. The air grew thinner with each passing second, and the station groaned ominously around them. Above, Jack and the Vulcan women raced against time. T'Pol's fingers flew over a console, reprogramming the station's sensors. Valar and Talar worked to stabilize the failing life support systems, while Jack coordinated with the few security officers he could trust. The fate of the summit, the station, and perhaps the entire human-Vulcan alliance hung in the balance. As Gerald dodged another invisible blow, he knew that the next few moments would determine not just their survival, but the future of interstellar relations. Stern's laughter echoed through the damaged corridor. You can't stop us, Tucker. Earth first will prevail, and your precious aliens will be driven from our world. Gerald's eyes met Spica's across the room. In that moment, despite the danger and the dwindling oxygen, he felt a surge of drive. They had come too far to fail now. With renewed vigor, He launched himself at their invisible foe, ready to fight for the future they all believed in. Gerald's fist connected with something solid, causing Stern's cloaking field to flicker momentarily. Taking advantage of the ambassador's disorientation, Gerald pressed forward, grappling with the invisible form. "Spica, can you pinpoint his location?" Gerald called out, ducking as he sensed movement to his right. Spica closed her eyes, focusing her keen Vulcan senses on the subtle distortions in the air. 3 meters to your left, moving quickly." Gerald lunged in the direction Spica indicated, feeling his shoulder collide with Stern's invisible form. The impact sent both men tumbling to the ground, the cloaking device sputtering and failing completely. Stern's face contorted with rage as he became fully visible. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, struggling against Gerald's grip. "Earth first will prevail." As they grappled on the floor, Spica moved swiftly to assist Gerald. Her Vulcan strength proved invaluable as she helped restrain the thrashing ambassador. Suddenly, the station shuddered violently, nearly throwing them off balance. Jack's voice crackled through the emergency communication system, urgency evident in his tone. "Dad, Spica, we've got a critical situation. T'Pol discovered a hidden subroutine in the station's computer system. It's set to trigger a catastrophic reactor overload. She's working to disarm it, but we're running out of time." Gerald's eyes met Spica's, a silent understanding passing between them. They needed to end this quickly. With new hope, Gerald tightened his hold on Stern. "It's over, Ambassador. Your plan has failed." Stern's eyes darted around wildly, searching for an escape route. His gaze settled on a nearby airlock control panel. With a sudden burst of strength, he broke free from Gerald's grasp and lunged for the controls. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you all with me," Stern shouted, his fingers poised over the airlock release. Time seemed to slow as Gerald watched in horror, his body moving on instinct. But before he could reach Stern, a blur of motion caught his eye. Spica launched herself forward, executing a flawless Vulcan martial arts maneuver. Her body twisted in midair, her leg connecting solidly with Stern's chest. The impact sent the ambassador crashing into the wall, away from the airlock controls. Gerald wasted no time. Despite the protests of his aging body, he moved with surprising agility, tackling Stern before he could recover. Together, he and Spica subdued the rogue ambassador, using spare wiring to secure his hands and feet. As they caught their breath, another violent tremor shook the station. Loose debris rained down around them, a stark reminder of the ticking clock they faced. "We need to get to the others," Gerald said, helping Spica to her feet. "Can you manage him?" Spica nodded, easily lifting the bound Stern over her shoulder. "Of course, lead the way." They navigated through the deteriorating corridors, the sounds of creaking metal and distant alarms creating an eerie atmosphere. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of disoriented delegates stumbling through the smoke-filled passageway. Gerald immediately shifted into diplomat mode, his voice calm and authoritative. "Everyone, please remain calm. Follow us to the central hub. We'll get you to safety." As they guided the group through the station, Gerald noticed the curious glances directed at Spica. The sight of a Vulcan working so seamlessly with a human seemed to challenge many of the delegates' preconceptions. They finally reached the central hub, finding it a hive of controlled chaos. Jack stood at the center, coordinating evacuation efforts with a mix of willpower and precision. Nearby, Talar and Vilar worked tirelessly at a bank of consoles, their fingers flying over the controls as they fought to maintain the station's structural integrity. "Dad," Jack called out, relief evident in his voice. "You made it, and you got Stern." Gerald nodded, helping Spica lower the still unconscious ambassador to the floor. "What's our status?" Jack's expression turned grim. "Not good. T'Pol's still working to disarm the Sabotage program, but the reactor's showing signs of imminent overload. We've started evacuations, but there's no way we'll get everyone out in time." The station groaned ominously, as if to emphasize Jack's point. Gerald surveyed the scene, his mind racing. Delegates from a dozen different species huddled in groups, fear and uncertainty etched on their faces. This was more than just a terrorist attack. It was a pivotal moment in interstellar relations. Drawing on years of diplomatic experience, Gerald stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're frightened, but right now, we need to work together." As he spoke, Spica moved to stand beside him, her calm Vulcan presence lending weight to his words. Gerald felt a surge of gratitude for her unwavering support. "We have a plan," he continued, meeting the eyes of delegates from various worlds. "But we need your cooperation. Please follow the instructions of our security team. They'll guide you to the escape pods." As the evacuation continued, Jack approached Gerald and Spica, his voice low. "We've got another problem. Earth's defense fleet is on the way, but they won't arrive before the reactor goes critical. We need to buy more time." Gerald's mind raced, considering and discarding options. Suddenly, his eyes fell on the cloaking device they'd taken from Stern. An idea began to form. "The cloaking device," he said, turning to Spica. "Could we use it to mask the station's energy signature? It might slow down the reactor overload." Spica's eyebrow arched as she considered the proposal. "Theoretically, yes, but it would require someone to manually install the device in the station's core. The radiation levels there are already approaching lethal levels for humans." Before Gerald could respond, Spica straightened her posture, her decision already made. "I will go. My Vulcan physiology is better suited to withstand the radiation." "Absolutely not," Gerald protested, his heart clenching at the thought of Spica putting herself in such danger. "It's too risky." Their eyes met, a wealth of unspoken emotions passing between them. The connection they shared, transcending age and species, was evident to all who witnessed it. As they stood at this crossroads, the station's alarms reached a fever pitch. The decision they made in the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but the future of human-Vulcan relations and the stability of the entire quadrant. Gerald's eyes darted between Spica and the cloaking device, his mind racing. In that instant, he made a decision that would change everything. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm despite the chaos around them. Before anyone could react, Gerald snatched the cloaking device and sprinted towards the station's core. His legs, fueled by adrenaline, carried him faster than he'd moved in years. "Gerald, no!" Spica's cry rang out behind him, but he didn't look back. The corridors blurred as he ran, alarms blaring in his ears. He could feel the station's structure groaning beneath his feet, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. Spica's footsteps echoed behind him, her Vulcan speed allowing her to close the gap quickly. "Gerald, stop! Your physiology cannot withstand the radiation." He ignored her pleas, pushing himself harder. The entry to the core loomed ahead, bathed in an ominous red glow. Jack's voice crackled over the comm system. "Dad, what are you doing? Get back here!" Gerald burst into the core room, the heat hitting him like a physical force. Warning signs flashed on every surface, indicating dangerous levels of radiation. He staggered forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Spica entered moments later, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Gerald, please, let me do this." He shook his head, already moving towards the central console. "No time to argue. Help me install this thing." The core pulsed with energy, waves of heat distorting the air around them. Gerald's hands shook as he began connecting the cloaking device to the station's systems. Sweat poured down his face, his vision blurring from the intense conditions. Spica moved to his side, her steady hands guiding his. Together, they worked to integrate the alien technology, their fingers dancing across the controls in a synchronized ballet. Outside the core room, Jack arrived, skidding to a halt at the entrance. The radiation levels prevented him from entering, forcing him to watch helplessly as his father and Spica risked their lives. "Dad, Spica, you need to get out of there now," Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the station's alarms. Inside, Gerald and Spica locked eyes for a moment. In that silent exchange, a lifetime of understanding passed between them. Without a word, they redoubled their efforts, their hands moving with renewed purpose. The cloaking device hummed to life, its alien circuitry pulsing with energy. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a wave washing over the station, the effect spread outward. The alarms quieted, their urgent wailing reduced to a more manageable level. The violent shaking that had been racking the station subsided to a gentle tremor. "It's working," Gerald breathed, a smile breaking across his exhausted face. His moment of triumph was short-lived. The accumulated radiation exposure suddenly caught up with him, and he felt his legs give way. The world tilted sideways as he collapsed. "Gerald!" Spica's voice seemed to come from far away. He felt her arms around him, pulling him away from the core. Through dimming vision, he saw Jack rush in, heedless of the danger. Together, Jack and Spica carried him out of the core room, his body limp between them. The trip to the medical bay passed in a blur of motion and muffled voices. Gerald drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of urgent conversation. Severe radiation poisoning. Need to get him to Earth. Vulcan healing techniques might... He felt a warm hand in his, anchoring him to reality. Spica's face swam into focus above him, her usually stoic features etched with worry. "Stay with me, Gerald," she said softly. "You must not leave us now." He tried to respond, but darkness claimed him before he could form the words. The next thing Gerald was aware of was the hum of engines. He cracked his eyes open to find himself in a sterile medical pod, a viewport showing the star-streaked vista of faster-than-light travel. Spica sat beside him, her posture rigid but her eyes never leaving his face. When she noticed he was awake, she leaned forward. "We are en route to Earth," she explained, her voice low and soothing. "The station is secure. T'Pol disabled the Sabotage program, and the Earth Defense Fleet has arrived." Gerald nodded weakly, relief washing over him. He wanted to ask more questions, but his body demanded rest. As he drifted off again, he felt Spica's hand gently squeeze his own. The journey to Earth passed in a series of hazy moments for Gerald. He was vaguely aware of being transferred to a state-of-the-art medical facility, of doctors and nurses bustling around him. Through it all, Spica remained a constant presence at his side. As his condition stabilized, Gerald became more aware of his surroundings. He noticed not only human medical staff, but Vulcan healers as well, working side by side in an unprecedented collaboration. Vilar, and T'Pol took turns visiting, their logical exteriors belied by the concern in their eyes. Jack split his time between his father's bedside and handling the aftermath of the attack, circles darkening under his eyes as the days wore on. News trickled in from the outside world. The foiled attack had become a galvanizing moment for human-alien relations. Gerald's actions, risking everything to save a station full of aliens, had captured the public's imagination. As Gerald's strength slowly returned, he found himself at the center of a changing world. The old barriers between species were beginning to crumble, replaced by a tentative hope for true cooperation. Yet even as he celebrated this progress, Gerald knew that challenges lay ahead. The Earth First conspiracy had been deep-rooted, and its remnants would not fade quietly. The path forward would require careful navigation, balancing the newfound trust between species with the very real concerns that had fueled isolationist sentiments. One afternoon, as Gerald sat up in bed reviewing reports on a datapad, Spica entered the room. Her usual Vulcan composure seemed slightly strained, an almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. "Gerald," she began, her dark eyes meeting his, "there is a matter we must discuss." "Gerald," she began, her dark eyes meeting his, "there is a matter we must discuss." Gerald set aside his datapad, giving Spica his full attention. He noticed a slight tremor in her usually steady hands, a telltale sign of concern that he had learned to recognize over their time together. "What is it, Spica?" he asked, his voice still weak but filled with warmth. Before she could respond, the door slid open, revealing Vilar, and T'Pol. They filed into the room silently, taking positions around Gerald's bed. The atmosphere in the room shifted, charged with an unspoken tension. Moments later, Jack entered, his military uniform wrinkled from long hours of work. He nodded to the Vulcans before turning to his father, relief evident in his eyes. "Dad, how are you feeling?" Jack asked, moving to stand beside the bed. Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of his medical team, a mix of human and Vulcan professionals. The lead doctor, a tall human woman with graying hair, stepped forward. "Mr. Stern, we have the results of your latest tests," she said, her tone professional but tinged with concern. "While you are recovering, there's something you need to know." Gerald straightened in his bed, steeling himself for the news. The Vulcan girls exchanged glances, their facades of calm slipping ever so slightly. The doctor continued, "The radiation exposure has accelerated your aging process. Our estimates suggest that your biological age has advanced by several years. This may shorten your remaining lifespan." The room fell silent. Gerald felt the weight of the news settle over him, heavy and oppressive. He looked at the faces around him, Jack's shock, the Vulcan's carefully controlled concern, and finally, Spica's dark eyes, filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I see," Gerald said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "What does this mean for my recovery?" As the medical team explained the implications and potential treatments, Gerald's mind raced. The realization that his time was now more limited than ever before struck him with surprising force. He thought of the progress they had made in human-Vulcan relations, of the work still left to do. Over the next few days, as Gerald's strength slowly returned, he became aware of a shift in the world outside his hospital room. News of his actions on the station had spread, capturing the public's imagination. The image of an elderly human diplomat risking everything to save a station full of aliens had struck a chord, challenging long-held prejudices. One afternoon, as Gerald sat by the window watching the bustling activity of the medical center's grounds, Jack entered the room, his face a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Dad, have you heard?" Jack asked, handing Gerald a datapad. "The government's proposing a joint human-Vulcan cultural exchange program, and they want you and the girls to be the faces of it." Gerald scrolled through the proposal, his eyes widening as he read. The program was ambitious, aiming to foster understanding and cooperation between humans and Vulcans on a personal level. "This is unexpected," Gerald murmured, looking up at his son. "What do you think about this, Jack?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his younger days. "I'm not sure, Dad. It's a big step. There's already opposition from hardliners on both sides. Some in the military think it could compromise Earth's security." Gerald nodded, understanding the concerns. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. "If the girls agree, of course." Jack's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Are you sure, Dad? With your condition?" Gerald reached out, grasping his son's hand. "Jack, my time is limited. This might be our best chance to make a real difference." As if on cue, the 4 Vulcan women entered the room. Spica, as always, moved to Gerald's side while the others arranged themselves around the room. "We have been informed of the proposal," T'Pol stated, her tone neutral. "It is a logical step towards improved relations between our species." Gerald looked at each of them in turn, saving Spica for last. "And you're all willing to participate?" They nodded, even as Talar added, "There will be challenges. Some on Vulcan fear prolonged exposure to human emotions could erode our way of life." "We'll face those challenges together," Gerald said, his gaze lingering on Spica. As preparations for the cultural exchange program began, Gerald found himself thrust into the spotlight. Every interaction with the Vulcan women was scrutinized, analyzed, and debated in the media. The attention was particularly focused on his relationship with Spica, their easy companionship raising eyebrows and sparking speculation. One evening, as Gerald and Spica walked slowly through the medical center's garden, he broached the subject. "Spica, this scrutiny, I hope it's not causing you discomfort." Spica was quiet for a moment, her face illuminated by the setting sun. "Discomfort is an emotion, Gerald. However, I find the attention illogical." Gerald chuckled softly, then grew serious. "Spica, our friendship means a great deal to me, more than I can express." Spica turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his face. "As does ours to me, Gerald. You have challenged many of my preconceptions about humans, about emotions." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and complex emotions. Gerald felt his heart race, aware of the lines they were approaching, lines of age, of species, of duty. Before either could speak further, Jack's voice called out from across the garden. "Dad, Spica, you need to see this." They hurried back to Gerald's room, where the others were gathered around a view screen. A news report was playing, showing footage of a protest outside the government buildings. "The remnants of Earth First," Jack explained grimly. "They're rallying against the exchange program, calling it a threat to human independence." Gerald watched the angry faces on the screen, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. The cultural exchange program was more crucial than ever, but the path forward was fraught with danger. As the days passed and the launch of the program drew nearer, the pressure began to take its toll on Gerald. His health, still fragile from the radiation exposure, began to decline once more. One night, as Gerald lay awake, struggling to breathe, Spica entered his room. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by an urgency that startled him. "Gerald," she said, moving swiftly to his bedside, "there may be a way to help you, to extend your life." He listened as she explained the experimental Vulcan medical technique, his heart pounding at the possibilities and the risks. The prospect of a deep mental link with a Vulcan healer both thrilled and terrified him. Before he could respond, an aide burst into the room, face flushed with excitement and fear. "Mr. Stern, we've just received an urgent communication from the Vulcan High Council. They say it's critical, about a threat to both Earth and Vulcan." Gerald looked from the aide to Spica, then back again. He realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that the decisions he made in the next few moments could shape the future of interstellar relations for generations to come. With a deep breath, Gerald pushed himself up in bed, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't face it alone. Gerald's eyes darted from the aide to Spica, his mind racing. The urgent communication from the Vulcan High Council couldn't have come at a more critical moment. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Bring me the details," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. As the aide hurried out, Spica moved closer, her expression betraying a hint of concern. "Gerald, we must discuss the procedure." "It'll have to wait," he interrupted gently. "Whatever this is, it sounds like we don't have much time." Within minutes, the room filled with familiar faces. Jack entered first, followed by Talar, Vilar, and T'Pol. The aide returned with a secure datapad, handing it to Gerald before retreating from the room. Gerald's eyes widened as he read the report. "My God," he whispered. "What is it, Dad?" Jack asked, tension evident in his voice. Gerald looked up, his gaze sweeping across the room. "A rogue faction of Vulcans has stolen advanced terraforming technology. They call themselves the Vitosh Kater, Vulcans without logic." T'Pol's eyebrow arched sharply. "Impossible. No Vulcan would abandon logic so completely." "Apparently these have," Gerald countered, "and they plan to use this technology on Earth to make it more suitable for Vulcan physiology." The implications hung heavy in the air. Jack was the first to break the silence. "That would devastate human civilization. We can't let that happen." Gerald nodded grimly. "No, we can't." He turned to Spica, decision crystallizing in his mind. "Spica, you mentioned a procedure. Tell me more." As Spica explained the experimental Vulcan medical technique, Gerald felt a mix of hope and trepidation. The process would involve a deep mental link with Spica herself, potentially reversing some of the radiation damage and extending his life. But the risks were substantial. "I'll do it," Gerald said firmly, cutting off Jack's protest. "We need every advantage we can get." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and intense mental connection. Gerald experienced the full force of Vulcan emotions and memories, his mind expanding in ways he never thought possible. The physical toll was immense, but as he emerged from the final session, he felt a vitality he hadn't known in years. Spica helped him sit up, her touch lingering on his arm. "How do you feel, Gerald?" He took a moment to assess himself. "Different, stronger, like my mind has been unlocked." Before they could discuss further, Jack burst into the room. "Dad, we need you. The cultural exchange program is being fast-tracked." Gerald quickly learned that the program was now a cover for a joint human-Vulcan task force, aimed at addressing the Vitosh Kater threat. He, the 4 Vulcan women, and Jack were to lead a covert operation to locate and infiltrate the rogue Vulcan's hidden base. As they boarded the prototype stealth ship, a seamless blend of human and Vulcan technologies, Gerald felt a new sense of purpose. His enhanced mental acuity, a result of the Vulcan procedure, buzzed with potential. The ship slipped silently through space, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to conventional sensors. Gerald stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the star-streaked vista before them. Suddenly, a flash of insight hit him. "Evasive maneuvers now!" he shouted. Jack, at the helm, reacted instantly. The ship veered sharply, narrowly avoiding a cloaked mine left in their path. "How did you know?" Jack asked, his voice a mix of awe and concern. Gerald shook his head, uncertain. "I just felt it." As their journey continued, more instances of Gerald's newfound precognition emerged. He instinctively guided them through treacherous areas of space, avoiding detection from both the Beauties and suspicious elements within Earth's military. The tension on the ship grew as they approached their destination. Jack watched his father with increasing unease, while the Vulcan women, especially Spica, seemed to view Gerald's transformation with a sense of validation. Finally, they reached the exoplanet where intelligence suggested the Sabotage had established their base. As they entered orbit, the ship's sensors revealed a startling sight. "Look," Talar said, pointing to a section of the planet's surface. "They've already begun." A large swath of the planet had been transformed, its environment altered to mimic Vulcan's harsh conditions. The sight stirred conflicting emotions in the Vulcan women, their carefully maintained control slipping. Gerald studied the scans, his enhanced mind rapidly processing the information. "We need to infiltrate their base," he announced, "and I have a plan." He outlined his strategy. The Vulcan women would pose as potential recruits, using their genuine emotional conflict to gain the trust of the Sabotage. Jack immediately objected. "It's too dangerous. We can't ask them to do this." "It's our best chance," Gerald countered. "We need to stop them without resorting to violence if possible." As they debated, alarms blared throughout the ship. T'Pol's fingers flew over the control panel. "Massive energy surge detected from the planet's surface," she reported. "They're powering up the terraforming device." Gerald's heart raced. Their carefully laid plans crumbled in an instant. "We're out of time," he said, locking eyes with Spica. "We need to move now." Without another word, they sprang into action. Gerald, Spica, and Jack prepared for a direct assault on the base, while Talar, Vilar, and T'Pol readied themselves to infiltrate and sabotage the terraforming technology. As they approached the Sabotage stronghold, Gerald felt his connection with Spica intensify. They moved in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's actions as if they shared one mind. Jack watched in amazement as his father, a man he had always known as a diplomat, fought with the skill and precision of a seasoned warrior. The power of human-Vulcan cooperation was undeniable, and Jack found his long-held reservations about alien alliances beginning to crumble. They pushed deeper into the enemy base, alarms blaring around them. Gerald's enhanced senses guided them through the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding patrols and security measures with uncanny accuracy. Finally, they reached the central control room. As the door slid open, Gerald came face to face with a tall, imposing Vulcan. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent a chill down Gerald's spine. "Welcome," the Vulcan said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "I am Sirach, leader of the Sabotage. You're too late to stop us, but I'm curious. Why do you fight so hard for a world not your own?" Gerald stepped forward, keenly aware of the countdown to Earth's terraforming. Ticking away in the background, he drew upon all his diplomatic experience, his newfound abilities, and his deepening understanding of Vulcan culture. "Sirach," he began, his voice steady, "we don't have to be enemies. There's more to logic than suppressing emotions. There's wisdom in understanding them, in finding a balance." Sirach's eyebrow arched, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "Go on," he said, as the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Balance. Gerald held Sirach's gaze, the tension in the room palpable. You speak of balance, Cyrox said, his voice low and measured. Yet you seek to prevent us from creating a world where we can truly be ourselves. Gerald took a step forward, his mind racing. He could feel Spica's presence beside him, their mental link humming with shared thoughts and emotions. An idea began to form. What if I told you there's a way to achieve your goals without destroying Earth? Gerald proposed. A way that could benefit both our species? Cyrox's eyebrow arched, curiosity replacing some of the hostility in his expression. I'm listening. Gerald glanced at Jack, who nodded in understanding. We propose a demonstration, Gerald continued. A small-scale model of Earth's ecosystem, right here in your base. We'll show you how humans and Vulcans can work together to create an environment suitable for both species without resorting to planet-wide terraforming. Cyrox's eyes narrowed, considering the offer. After a moment of tense silence, he nodded. Very well. You have 1 hour to prepare your demonstration. If it fails to convince me, we proceed as planned. With the temporary ceasefire in place, Gerald's team sprang into action. Talar, Vilar, and T'Pol began adapting the terraforming technology to create a controlled environment within a large chamber of the base. Their fingers flew over control panels, adjusting parameters with precision born of years of scientific expertise. Jack, meanwhile, set to work integrating human technology to balance the atmospheric conditions. He moved with purpose, his military training evident in his efficient movements as he connected power couplings and calibrated sensors. At the center of it all, Gerald and Spica worked in perfect synchronization. Their mental link allowed them to anticipate each other's needs without a word spoken. As Gerald adjusted the gravity controls, Spica was already there with the necessary tools. When Spica began programming the day-night cycle, Gerald had the lighting systems prepared and calibrated. Their seamless cooperation did not go unnoticed. Several Vitosh Couture members watched with growing interest, murmuring among themselves about the unexpected efficiency of human-Vulcan collaboration. As the demonstration neared completion, a commotion erupted near the chamber's entrance. Tyrell, Cyrox's second-in-command, stormed in with a group of hardline supporters. "This is blasphemy!" Tyrell shouted, her face contorted with rage. "We cannot allow these humans to corrupt our purpose." Gerald and his team found themselves surrounded, the hostile Vitosh Couture closing in with weapons drawn. Jack moved to stand back-to-back with his father, while Spica took up a defensive stance beside them. In that moment, Gerald felt a surge of clarity unlike anything he'd experienced before. Time seemed to slow as his enhanced senses took in every detail of the room. He could anticipate the movements of the attackers, reading their intentions in the subtle shifts of their muscles. "Jack! Duck left," Gerald said calmly, just as a Vitosh cater lunged forward. Jack moved without hesitation, narrowly avoiding the attack. In the same fluid motion, Gerald stepped forward, using the attacker's momentum to throw him off balance. Spica moved in perfect harmony with Gerald, her movements mirroring his as they defended against multiple assailants. Their synchronized defense was a testament to the power of their mental link, each anticipating and complementing the other's actions. As the skirmish unfolded, Talar, Valar, and T'Pol completed the final adjustments to the ecosystem model. The chamber hummed to life, holographic projections flickering into existence to display the blended environment. The fighting ground to a halt as all eyes turned to the spectacle before them. Within the chamber, a lush earth forest seamlessly transitioned into a Vulcan desert landscape. Streams of water flowed from the forest, feeding into carefully designed irrigation systems that sustained drought-resistant Vulcan plants. The air shimmered with a mix of Earth and Vulcan atmospheric conditions, creating a unique but stable environment. Cyrox stepped forward, his eyes wide with wonder. "Impossible," he whispered, reaching out to touch a leaf that was unmistakably Terran, yet thrived in the hybrid environment. Tyrell, however, was not swayed. "It's a trick," she spat, lunging for the control panel. "I'll not let humans dictate our future." Gerald moved with inhuman speed, intercepting Tyrell before she could reach the controls. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to subdue her without causing harm, his movements precise and controlled. The display of Gerald's abilities, clearly augmented by Vulcan influence, caused a ripple of astonishment through the Vitosh Couture ranks. Murmurs of disbelief and reconsideration spread among them. As Gerald secured Tyrell, Jack received an urgent communication on his wrist device. His face paled as he listened to the message. "Dad," Jack called out, his voice tight with tension. "Earth's defense systems have detected the terraforming technology. They're preparing a preemptive strike against this base. We have less than 3 hours before they arrive." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Gerald locked eyes with Cyrock, seeing the conflict within the Vulcan leader. "Cyrock," Gerald said, his voice calm but urgent. "We're out of time for demonstrations. We need to make a decision now, or we risk triggering an interstellar war that will devastate both our peoples." Cyrock's gaze moved from Gerald to the ecosystem model, then back again. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gerald took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 2 worlds on his shoulders. "A joint human-Vulcan colony," he said. "A place where both species can live together, learn from each other. A prototype for future cooperation, and a haven for Vulcans who struggle with emotional suppression." He stepped closer to Cyrock, his voice gaining strength. "Let me act as an intermediary between the Vitosh Katur and Earth's government. We can turn this potential disaster into an opportunity for unprecedented collaboration." As Cyrock contemplated the offer, Tyrell broke free from her restraints. With a cry of defiance, she lunged for the terraforming device's main control panel. "For Vulcan!" she shouted, her hand poised over the activation switch. Gerald and Spica moved as one, their shared consciousness allowing them to react with lightning speed. They raced towards Tyrell, knowing that the fate of both Earth and Vulcan hung in the balance. In that crucial moment, as Gerald and Spica closed in on Tyrell, Cyrock's voice rang out, carrying the weight of a decision that would reshape the future of interstellar relations. Cyrock's eyes widened, his tenacity visibly wavering as he witnessed Gerald and Spica's synchronized movement. In that crucial moment, Gerald's mind raced. He knew that physical intervention alone wouldn't be enough to prevent catastrophe. Drawing upon his deepened connection with Spica and the enhanced abilities granted by their mental link, Gerald made a split-second decision. As Tyrell's hand hovered over the activation switch, Gerald projected a powerful mental image. The room seemed to fade away, replaced by a vivid vision of a thriving colony. Human and Vulcan children played together in lush gardens, their laughter echoing through the air. Scientists from both species collaborated in state-of-the-art laboratories, their combined intellect pushing the boundaries of knowledge. In communal gathering spaces, Vulcans engaged in open displays of emotion without fear of judgment, while humans practiced meditation techniques, finding inner calm. The vision was so potent, so real, that everyone in the room experienced it as if they were there. Cyrock gasped, his eyes unfocused, as he absorbed the potential future laid out before him. Even Tyrell froze, her hand trembling above the switch as the power of the shared experience washed over her. Gerald's voice, steady and clear, cut through the stunned silence. "This is our future, Cyrock. A future where Vulcans and humans learn from each other, grow together. Where your people can explore their emotions without sacrificing their culture. This is the balance you seek." Cyrock's gaze snapped back to Gerald, a newfound respect evident in his eyes. How is this possible?" "The same way we created that ecosystem," Gerald replied, gesturing to the chamber behind them. "Cooperation, understanding, the willingness to see beyond our differences." Cyrock straightened, his decision made. "Shut it down," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Disengage the terraforming device immediately." Most of the Vitosh Katur moved to comply, but Tyrell snarled in defiance. "No, we've come too far!" She lunged for the control panel, but Jack was already in motion. With military precision, he tackled Tyrell, pinning her arms behind her back. To his surprise, several Vitosh Katur rushed to assist him, securing the struggling Vulcan. "We choose the path of cooperation," one of them announced, meeting Cyrock's approving nod. As the terraforming device powered down, alarms blared throughout the base. Jack's wrist device flashed urgently. "Dad, Earth strike force is minutes away. We're out of time." Gerald's enhanced mind worked at lightning speed, formulating a plan. He strode to the communication console, his fingers flying over the controls. "This is Gerald Cochran, requesting immediate communication with Earth Defense Command. Authorization code Zulu Tango 937. Seconds stretched like hours as they waited for a response. Finally, the screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Helena Reeves. "Cochran? What the hell is going on down there? We're about to—" "Admiral, I need you to abort the strike immediately," Gerald interrupted, his voice carrying a newfound authority that made even the hardened military commander pause. "The situation has changed. We've negotiated a peaceful resolution with the Beauties. Firing now would not only be unnecessary but would destroy a historic opportunity for interstellar cooperation." Admiral Reeves's eyes narrowed. "You have 30 seconds to convince me, Cochran." Gerald didn't waste a moment. He outlined the events of the past hour, the breakthrough in human-Vulcan relations, and the potential for a joint colony. As he spoke, Spica stepped forward, lending her mental strength to Gerald's words. The Admiral's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. "This is unprecedented," Reeves said slowly. "But even if I believe you, I can't just call off a military operation on the word of a civilian." "Then don't take my word for it," Gerald replied. He gestured to Cyrock, who stepped into view of the communication screen. "This is Cyrock, leader of the Beauties. He can confirm everything I've said." Cyrock nodded solemnly. "What Mr. Cochran says is true, Admiral. We have seen the error of our ways and seek a peaceful resolution. The terraforming device has been deactivated, and we are prepared to enter into negotiations for the establishment of a joint colony." Admiral Reeves was silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting between Gerald, Cyrock, and the readouts on her own screens. Finally, she spoke. "Strike Force, stand down. I repeat, stand down. All units return to base." She turned back to Gerald. "You've bought yourself some time, Cochran. I expect a full report within the hour, and we'll be sending a diplomatic team to oversee these negotiations." As the communication ended, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Gerald felt the tension drain from his body, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. He turned to find Spica at his side, her hand slipping into his. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Jack approached, a mix of pride and amazement on his face. "Dad, I've never seen anything like it. How did you do that?" Gerald smiled, feeling the warmth of Spica's presence in his mind. "It wasn't just me, son. It was all of us, working together. This is just the beginning." As the immediate crisis passed, the real work began. Over the next several days, Gerald, Spica, Jack, and the other Vulcan women worked tirelessly to broker an agreement between Earth, Vulcan, and the Beauties. The negotiations were intense, with centuries of mistrust and misunderstanding to overcome. But with each passing hour, the vision Gerald had shared began to take shape in reality. Plans were drawn up for New Harmony, a joint colony on the exoplanet where humans and Vulcans would live and work side by side. It would be a place of learning, of cultural exchange, and of new beginnings. As the sun set on the 5th day of negotiations, Gerald stood on a hilltop overlooking the site chosen for New Harmony. The first prefabricated structures were already being assembled in the valley below, a tangible symbol of the progress they'd made. Spica's presence beside him was a comforting constant, their bond having deepened through the shared challenges of the past week. Talar, Valar, and T'Pol joined them, each having found their own roles in the burgeoning community. "It's really happening," Talar said, a note of wonder in her voice. "I never imagined we'd see anything like this in our lifetime." Gerald nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is just the beginning," he replied, echoing his earlier words to Jack. "We've opened a door, but it's up to all of us to step through it." As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jack's voice called out from behind them. "Dad, you're going to want to hear this." Gerald turned to see his son jogging up the hill, a datapad clutched in his hand. Jack's face was flushed with excitement as he reached the group. "I just got word from Earth," Jack announced, slightly out of breath. "The news of New Harmony has spread, and it's causing a ripple effect across the galaxy. Other alien races are reaching out, asking about establishing similar partnerships. The implications of Jack's words settled over the group. Gerald felt a swell of emotion as he looked at the faces around him. His son, his adopted Vulcan daughters, and Spica, whose presence in his mind had become as natural as breathing. "It seems," Gerald said, his voice thick with pride and hope, "that our little family might have just changed the course of interstellar history." As night fell on the world that would become New Harmony, Gerald knew that their journey was just getting started. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome. But as he stood there, surrounded by the family he had never expected to have, he felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. The old human who had once reluctantly agreed to adopt 4 alien refugees now stood as a bridge between worlds, the architect of a new era of interstellar cooperation. And as the first lights of New Harmony blinked on in the valley below, Gerald Cochran knew that their greatest adventures were still to come.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.